Jesse Ramos, your host of the Let Freedom Ring podcast.
When you deconstruct where a debt is, and I don't think there's only one possible recourse, and that's appropriate everything.
Yep.
And I say, our founding fathers must have been pretty clever.
Yeah.
And they must have thought it was important because they put it in Article 1 up front. No money should be removed from the Treasury unless by consequence of appropriations. And what's happened over the period of time is we put these very clever conveniences in, like discretionary, non-discretionary, mandated, omnibuses, continuing resolutions. They're tricks.
Yep.
They're tricks that allowed Congress not to do their job.
Advocate responsibility.
We advocate responsibility. And now when you look at the budget, and there's a difference between a debt and a budget, right? Debt's what we spent. This is what we owe. The budget is how we got there or how we get out. But when you have 75% of the budget that you don't even look at, Congress doesn't appropriate that. That's already been appropriated. It's on overdrive.
Yep.
That's Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, 75%. Then you got the other 25%, half of that's defense.
Yep.
So on the quote debt bill, right, you segregate it out, 75%, we're not going to look at it.
Yep.
Now we're gonna take out defense, which is half of discretionary.
So,
and then we're gonna isolate the veterans.
Yep.
Right? So what do you got left?
Less than 10%.
You got about a dime out of a dollar, and then how are you going to control spending on that one? You're going to say, well, we're just going to go to last year.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so how does that answer the bell on a $31 trillion, now possibly $4 trillion left? You cannot get there unless you go back to Article 1, Section 9 and appropriate and do the hard lift. Because we got programs that are taking in water and they're sinking.
Yeah.
That's Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. So we need to patch the holes, reconfigure organization. And you got males that are 18 to 45 years old. A third of them aren't working. A third. That means a third of the males. And when I say not working, no 1099, no W-2. So what are they doing? Well, some are going to college, okay? Some are cash business, okay? They're not paying into any system. Most are on the couch, or they're incarcerated because there isn't a lot of room and other categories. And every system we have was built on the fundamental idea that more people would work and less people would take out. And it's the same thing in our budget.
Yep.
Is that all of a sudden... And we're going to have to reorganize. From a military perspective, reorganize and go back to the Constitution. That's it.
And Congressman, kind of along those lines, so at Americans for Prosperity, we certainly believe that the American dream has fallen out of reach for a lot of people. A lot of Montanans, as the government's gotten bigger and bigger, the American dream has gotten smaller and smaller and smaller. So what can be done? And I know you're doing a lot of great work in Congress to address this, but what can be done to reignite the American dream for a lot of these folks that feel left behind? And they have been by an oversized government and an oversized bureaucracy.
Well, a lot of the American dream, right? Let's say housing, to buy a home.
Yep.
Even if you were to take energy costs and bring them down, what we did in the Trump administration. And by the way, on energy, yep. When I came in as secretary, we were 8.3 million barrels a day and declining. 2 years. First 2 years, we were 12.5 million barrels a day. We were the world's largest exporter of energy, producer of energy, and we lowered emissions. So yep. It's amazing what we can do if we get government out of the way. But on the American dream, a lot of it is own a house and make sure the next generation has more opportunity than the previous. That's the American dream, right? On housing, even if we were to bring energy costs back down where they should be, gas, during the Trump administration was about $2 a gallon, remember?
Yeah, yep.
Yeah.
I long for those days.
Yeah. So, and if you were curb spending to get inflation back down, in the Trump administration, it was about 2%, a little low.
Yep.
Right? And you bring interest rates down to where they should be, historical lows. How does a Montanan buy a $700,000 house, right? Because you saw the huge rapid advance of cost of housing,
Absolutely.
right? And one of the ways we can do it is title and access. I mean, that there's no reason why we couldn't look at doing what Europe is doing on a 50-year mortgage. Now, why a 50-year mortgage? It brings the monthly cost down. And it makes it accessible for a lot more people looking at a monthly payment when you can drop it. Doesn't mean you're going to keep the house for 50 years. Yeah, in your lifetime, you might have 4 houses, but allows you the equity to bump up. I think we need to expand the opportunity for title on condos, because it's about getting in the market and having title, so then you can sell that title, you can leverage the title, you can get a home equity mortgage. But if you are locked out of home ownership, right, you'll never, ever get there without looking at cost and different ways to make sure you get people to have a title.
Absolutely.
And the American dream, it's still there, but we're going to have to fight for it. The fight for freedom, never ends, right? And tyrants have long risen and fallen. And what we see in many cases, unfortunately, our government is viewed as a tyrant. Whether it's the weaponization of the FBI or the DOJ or heavy-handedness or telling you have to buy an electric car or not, and this is the way you live your life, and you can't. Our constitutional framework is becoming eroded and threatened.
Yeah,
that's a concern. It's always been a concern, and I would say it takes an active citizenry to say enough.
Absolutely.
And what we're seeing, I think we're seeing a rise in an active citizenry and saying, enough's enough. Let's hold our leadership accountable. On the congressional side, we have to do our part. We have to stand tall, and we have to have the courage to address some of these challenges.
Kind of along those lines too, Congressman, so really want to get your input on energy as the former Secretary of the Interior and now a member of the House of Representatives. We've seen right now, as we talked about in the previous administration, energy prices were at an all-time low, and right now gas prices are crushing Montanans. I mean, we've got heating costs that are crushing Montanans. We've got electric prices that are crushing Montanans. And we have this American energy abundance. I mean, we are a wealth of natural resources and energy, but we're not able to tap into it because of the Biden administration right now, putting all these regulations top down. What can be done, first of all, on the House side, and then what do we need on the Senate side to actually get something done and bring these costs down for Montanans? Would love to hear your expertise.
And why is energy important? Because energy drives everything.
Yep.
If we want to manufacture in this country, then we need energy to manufacture where it's economic. And here's the big irony of what's going on in the Biden administration, is the moment we become energy independent, and in some areas energy dominant, this administration says all stop on fossil fuels. We're gonna go to EV. Supply chain. So where do the components come from? Well, China.
Yep.
Right. Where do the critical minerals come from? The batteries, lithium, cadmium, cobalt. Who controls the chips or the solar cells? China. So ironically, the moment we become independent and are no longer vulnerable to the Saudi Arabian area of Middle East oil and gas, we're now going back and becoming vulnerable to who? China.
Yep.
And at higher cost. So because the supply chain, and what are we going to do when a battery ends its life cycle? Where does it go?
And I have to dispose of it somewhere.
Well, where does it go?
Battery.
90% of solar cells go into some landfill across the U.S.
Yep.
I can tell you what's in a solar cell is not good.
Nope.
Shouldn't be going to landfill. So on energy side, we're blessed with an enormous amount of energy, and no one does it better. So we do need to make sure we build the infrastructure so we can move energy seamlessly, whether it's transmission lines or pipelines. We need to build gasification facilities so we can export natural gas and import in a network and shift energy from regions. There's a lot we can do, but this administration at every corner is an all assault against American energy. And you have to have energy that's low cost because that drives people out of poverty, right? It drives manufacturing opportunities. And energy security is national security.
Absolutely.
100%. There's a lot we can do, and I'm all the above.
Yeah.
But every energy has its play, and you can't subsidize one side of the sector that can't provide the power that's needed.
Can't pick winners and losers. The market will figure it out.
Yeah, and you can drive technology, and cleaner is always better. But there's also the practicality of it. Zero, a lot of times, is zero.
Yep.
And it puts you in a position where we're vulnerable. And it seems to be the drive is, regardless of the science behind it, we're just gonna take this path. And it's enormously dangerous for national security, for our economic path, and quite frankly, for the environment.
Well, and like you mentioned, I mean, when you were Secretary of the Interior, emissions went down. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that? When you were the Secretary of the Interior, how you were producing more oil than ever, but emissions were still going down.
Because no one does it better than we do. If you want to look at how not to produce energy, I'll take you on a little tour of the Middle East and go over to Russia, where they have no pollution controls. And look at China. China's the number one emitter of CO2. Number one. 90% of the plastic in the world in our oceans comes from 4 rivers in China. 90%. There are islands that are 800 kilometers in diameter floating around the Pacific that are made in China.
Yeah.
China is the world's leader in illegal fishing, and I can go on and on and on and on. So why is it better to produce energy in North America? Because we do it responsibly. That doesn't mean you do it singly. It doesn't mean you say, well, we're going to just do EV. It's a spread of it, but also it has to be abundant, it has to be reliable, and it has to be affordable.
Absolutely.
And those are the components. And I'm excited about new energy technology. I wish we had a battery, but we don't, right? We don't have a battery that will last long in a mega charge. But until we advance this technology, to blindly jump off a cliff and say we're going to go to zero emissions when we haven't looked at the supply chain, how to get there, is just nuts.
Oh, absolutely it is. And kind of along those lines, what were some of the negative, both environmental consequences and financial consequences of canceling the Keystone XL pipeline for Montana?
Well, the Keystone is interesting because when you look at inside the market, why is the Keystone so important? And there are 52 different pipelines, I think, between Canada and the U.S. So a lot of it was just held up as we're gonna on the environmental side, we're gonna assassinate this project. We're gonna make it a poster child, right?
Yep.
But as it turns out, the heavy crudes that are coming from the Canadian fields are exactly what's needed in our refining capability. We used to get a lot of heavy crudes from Venezuela, and there's different types of crudes.
Yep.
Most of our capacity for refining requires blending of these heavier crudes because most of them were built when we were importing a lot more from Venezuela. So in order to make up those heavy crudes, where do we get it from? Well, Russia has heavies. Yep. Brazil has a little. But our neighbor, who happens to have a lot, is Canada, yep. and they happen to be an ally. From Montana, they're really good neighbors.
Absolutely.
So we like our neighbors. Plus, it's energy security. So, yep. And really, what we're talking about is 18 inches of pipeline, because it was approved down, it was approved up. It showed it was 18 inches. It would have helped shored up, I think, our national security. Would have provided some on-ramps for Montana crude, good jobs, and it became a political football. Unfortunately, the progressives, the intolerance, and actually the ones that are doing more harm in the environment, shut it down.
It's so disappointing. And moving on to kind of our last topic here, which is inflation. I mean, we've talked about a couple things, housing, we've talked about energy. I mean, but all across the board, prices are rising because of the irresponsible spending of Biden administration, enabled in large part by Senator Tester. So what is your message to Senator Tester and to the Biden administration about the reckless spending that's driving up the cost for Montana citizens?
Well, inflation, the big drivers of inflation are energy costs, which we've seen this administration raise the energy costs. And by the way, it's subsidized. The EV world is so heavily subsidized. Billions of dollars are going to an industry that will never rise above what a requirement is. But the other cost is excessive spending. The debt bill. The debt bill is a perfect example of a bill that was misleading because it didn't do what it said it would do. Again, when you take a budget, take out 75%, take out then defense, put that isolated, take out veterans. What do you have left? You got a dime on a dollar, and you're going to try to adjust $31 trillion in debt plus 4 on 10% of the budget, which really doesn't have a lot of room. And but believe me, if you can't find waste in the federal government, you're not looking very hard. And even those, I'm pro defense. Navy SEAL, 23 years. Believe me.
Thank you for your service.
But even the Department of Defense, we have 800,000 DoD employees. Those are civilian employees in the Department of Defense. That's twice as large as the standing Navy, larger than the Army and the National Guard combined. So you look at the budget, which I do.
Yeah.
The Department of Defense is fast becoming a pension fund and a healthcare provider.
Yep.
For unless we reorganize, and the VA is the same thing. These bureaucracies that go on overdrive that don't have the oversight, that don't have the scrutiny, they become mammoth, and they lose focus on mission. And look, we have a lot of problems across the globe.
Absolutely.
And having a military that has bureaucracy in it that can't get things done quickly, we're going to have to reorganize for the future.
Yeah, and we really appreciate your time today. We've got a couple more minutes left. Just wanted to give this as an opportunity for you to kind of tell Montanans what you're working on and what some of your top issues are and how that's going to really improve their lives so we can get them through.
Well, I said it on appropriations, and I'll go back to Article 1, our founding fathers. They must have thought it was important because they put it in Article 1 up front.
Yep.
Is that on appropriations, no money should be drawn from the Treasury unless by consequence of appropriations. So I'm focused on returning the appropriations and making sure we bring our fiscal house in the order, and then call to question this administration's, I think, incalculable errors on Ukraine as an example. What's the plan? And I've asked the highest levels of government, what's the plan? Because we've spent $130 billion. What's the plan? And I don't like blank checks. Yeah. And I see ourselves blindly tiptoeing into nuclear combat over the Russians, over Ukraine. I'm all about freedom, but tell me the plan.
Yep.
And then the same thing, the pivot in China. What's the plan? Where do we sit? Because our allies don't trust us. I would think that was primarily from Afghanistan. And if our allies don't trust us and our enemies don't fear us, then our military is out of position. So a lot of what I do is on the fiscal side, but on Montana side, Montana's different. We're not the Dakotas, we're not Wyoming, and we're not Idaho. Our lifestyle is worthy of protecting. And a lot of what I do is push back on a bureaucracy that wants to tell us how to live our lives. Most of DC sees Montana through the lens of a Yellowstone movie, right?
Yeah.
And I said, look, Yellowstone is a great drama. It's just set in Montana. Just like Star Wars is a great drama. It's just happened to be set in space. But back off on telling us how to live our lives. I mean, how do you think you can manage the Yellowstone River if you don't know where it is? But they want to manage the water temperature, the flow, the riparian bank, wildlife in, out of the river, watershed, and waters of the U.S. intermittent streams and ponds.
Yep.
and they want to manage our lives. And that was never the intention of our Constitution, which as a military officer, I gave an oath to defend, and I will.
All top-down regulations and everything else. Well, Congressman, I know you got to run. I can't thank you enough for your time, and we'll see you soon, hopefully.
Pleasure.
Hey, thank you so much.